New York Bio hosted our first ever Patient Engagement Summit in April 2021, bringing together leaders from industry, advocacy organizations, and patients and caregivers for an event centered on the role and voice of the patient in biotech innovation. We'd like to thank our sponsors, including our presenting sponsor, Pfizer, our panel sponsors, Semaphore, Circuit Clinical, Ovid Therapeutics, and Bristol Myers Squibb, as well as Alexion, Horizon, Lexeo Therapeutics, and UCB. We're also fortunate to have several patient organization partners, including the American Cancer Society's Cancer Action Network, the AMED Alliance, the Allergy and Asthma Network, the Arthritis Foundation, the Association of Oncology Social Work, the Autoimmune Registry, the Children's Tumor Foundation, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, the International Pain Foundation, the Lupus and Allied Diseases Association, the National Eczema Association, New York Oncology and Hematology, Patients Rising, Sickle Cell Thalassemia Patients Network, and Stronger Than Sarcoidosis. This panel discusses advocacy and sharing your story as a patient. Sponsored by Semaphore and featuring Erin Moriarty-Wade from My Tomorrows, Carrie Wong from Stronger Than Sarcoidosis, Ella Balassa, who's a patient panelist, and it's moderated by Jacqueline Colanesi of Semaphore.
Hi, everybody. I am Jacqueline Colanesi. I am honored to be moderating today's session and discussion regarding patient advocacy and sharing your story. I am here today with three wonderful panelists, and we're going to go into the work that patient advocacy entails. We are going to talk about the experiences of our panelists who are patients and caregivers and advocates themselves and have done really incredible work in this space. And we're going to talk about where this work is going. So quickly before we get started, just a little bit of background on myself and Semaphore, who I am here representing. So Semaphore is a health intelligence company. We are dedicated to advancing healthcare through insights that are derived by harnessing large amounts of data. So that is genomic data, that is data from clinical records, it is biometric data. And this data that comes from millions of patients is standardized and curated and analyzed using artificial intelligence in such a way that we can use it to actually better understand the health trajectories of individual patients more accurately. And so this information that can be used to understand individual patients can then be used by their providers to better diagnose disease, better treat it, whether that is matching a patient to the right therapy or appropriate clinical trial, or whether it's analyzing risk models to, better understand the potential for the onset of disease, or perhaps in the future, preventing it altogether. And so another thing that we do at Semaphore is that we want to make it very simple and seamless for providers and patients alike to access and use this data. And this is actually where my role comes in. So I am on the product development team at Semaphore. This is the digital arm of the company. And so I head up our content strategy. So I'm a writer and a strategist, and my role is all about communicating with patients and giving them the education and the information they need to become a partner in their own treatment decisions. So that might be breaking down test results. That might be providing tools that allow patients to better track the course of their care and have better conversations with their physicians. It might be conducting user testing with patients to better understand their perspective on the products that we're developing, or it might be recruiting individuals into enrolling in our digital or clinical studies. And I think I can speak for everyone at Semaphore when I say we strongly believe in empowering patients to be active participants in their care. And so I am incredibly excited to hear from today's panelists about their own experiences, both fighting for themselves, empowering others in their communities, advancing research, advancing care. And so I cannot wait to hear from them. And I am going to turn it over to them to give a little bit of background about themselves, introduce themselves, and talk about the work that they have done. So let's get started. Carrie, why don't we start with you?
Okay. Hi, everybody. First off, thank you so much for having me here. I am very excited about this opportunity. And so I will give you a little bit about me. I'm 46, happily married, no kids. I have been disabled by my long list of conditions, but I still do all that I can to advocate for patients like me. And so a little of kind of the background of this. I started feeling what I always used to call random achy pains. I didn't know what they were from, where they came, there didn't seem to be any reason. I was getting really dizzy. I had this incredible fatigue back in 2007. And around then was when I kind of started to realize this is more than just a little bit of, not feeling great. There's something really wrong. And in 2008, I decided to start, trying to find an answer. And I thought it would be simple back then. Something is wrong. You go to the doctor. They say, you have this, take that, and you're all better. But that was not at all how things went for me. I spent 4 years of doctors just telling me I looked fine. And so it was all in my head. And the most common thing was, oh, you must just be depressed. And, doctor after doctor, year after year, this was the answer I was getting. So I basically gave up on doctors because it seemed like they gave up on me. But then in 2011, I developed new symptoms. I had severe swelling and rashes, and I was excited about that because I could actually walk into a doctor's office and I could say, look, this is not in my head. There is something wrong. And at that point, what the doctor said to me was, okay, you have some kind of arthritis. It's probably autoimmune, and I don't know. And that was kind of how things were. Here, take some prednisone, and you're good to go. And then I spent another 4 years trying to figure out what was wrong. We had, misdiagnosis after misdiagnosis, failed treatment after failed treatment. Eventually, finally, I was diagnosed with, and again, this is just the beginning of the list, but fibromyalgia, sarcoidosis, which is a rare disease that causes inflammation and problems kind of anywhere in your body, small fiber neuropathy, and most recently we've added rheumatoid arthritis and Sjogren's syndrome to what my rheumatologist calls my own flavor of autoimmune soup. And that's just the best way I've ever actually heard it described. Now, I know some of you are sitting here and shaking your heads because this is just such a common story of how much we've been dismissed, how much people, they don't know, and we just keep going and going. And so I think that because that is so, it's so familiar, but that's just so wrong. And so because that's not the way it should be. It shouldn't be that way for me. It shouldn't be that way for you. It shouldn't be that hard for anybody. And so that's why my mission in life now is to basically do anything I can to make this journey a little bit easier for people like us. So I am currently the New York Advocacy Chair with the Arthritis Foundation. And in perfect timing for today, we actually have a group of us have a meeting with Senator Schumer's office this afternoon to discuss a few different issues related to access to care. And we also have a committee meeting after that to figure out some things for state level legislation. I have been an ambassador with the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. I created the first sarcoidosis events in Westchester County. And now as a peer mentor with FSR, I get to help other advocates to do the same kind of thing. And so what's great is that in both of these roles, I get to take what I do and kind of make it exponentially grander, bigger, larger, have more of a reach, because I'm not just doing the things myself, but now I'm helping other advocates to learn how to do it, and to then they can take it to even more. And so we just keep on growing. As if that wasn't enough, last year I co-founded a new nonprofit organization called Stronger Than Sarcoidosis with 3 of my fellow sarcoidosis warriors. They are my family, they are my heart. And our primary goal is to ensure that all sarcoidosis patients know that they are not alone in this. We do that by raising awareness, offering support and connection through a variety of media events and activities. And today is not just perfect timing for my Arthritis Foundation advocacy, but having this right now, April is Sarcoidosis Awareness Month. So this is really the perfect opportunity for us to help more people to become more aware, to learn not just what the disease is, but how they can get more engaged in their own care and in just making in legislation in every kind of aspect of it, really. So with that, I am very, very glad to be here, and even more glad that all of you are here.
Thank you, Carrie. You sound, the work you've done is amazing, and you sound incredibly busy, and I'm very impressed. And I can't wait to dive a little bit more into the specifics of how people can get started with this. And that said, let's hear from our other panelists. So Erin, why don't we hear from you next?
Thanks, Jackie. I'm Erin Moriarty-Wade. I'm a content specialist at NewYorkBIO's, which is a platform that links patients with unmet medical need to treatments and development around the world. And part of what we do is a free service that helps patients and their physicians find and access clinical trials. And we have a team of patient navigators who help guide them through that process. And before coming to My Tomorrows, I was writing about healthcare for about 15 years almost. I've worked on developing content for the pharmaceutical industry, as well as healthcare organizations, hospitals like Boston Children's Hospital, the Barrel Institute, just kind of a variety of healthcare clients. And on a personal note, I'm also the mom of a child with a rare disease. So I have kind of the past 5 years of personal experience in terms of, navigating the healthcare system and pharma, and I understand what it's like to kind of live with that daily unmet medical need and just the ins and outs of that experience that patients and caregivers have. And through kind of my personal experience, I got involved with CARA, and I'm on a physician-patient work group, and I'm also on a clinical trial design advisory board, which have been really meaningful for me because it's working on research that hopefully someday could help kids like my daughter. And I'm also a member of Savvy Co-op, so I was really happy to see Jen in the last panel. And I love the idea of this panel, the topic, because I'm very passionate about helping patients tell their stories. As a writer, that's something that I can do is, they can share with me and I can put it into words and put it on paper and kind of bring it to life in a way that they can share it with the world. And that's one of my favorite parts of my job at My Tomorrows is that I've been able to interview a lot of patients with life-threatening conditions and kind of discuss how they were running out of treatment options and how they were searching and how we were able to help them find and access clinical trials. And I think those stories are really important, not only because they give patients a voice, but they also are an educational tool for other patients who may be, dealing with similar challenges. So I think it's a great topic for the panel, and I'm really glad to be here.
Thank you. We're really glad you're here too, and agree that the power of story is really incredible in both making us feel not alone and getting others to better understand our story. And so it's also interesting that you've kind of been experiencing this now from both sides. And so last but not least, of course, I would love to hear from Ella.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me here today and sharing my experiences with all of you. I'm a patient advocate with cystic fibrosis, and that is a genetic lung disease that causes the buildup of mucus in the lungs and then a deterioration in lung function over time. And I began my advocacy journey about 4 years ago, and I have a background in biology, and the work that I was doing in the lab had overlapped with my health. I was looking at antibiotic-resistant bacteria as cystic fibrosis causes bacterial infections to build up in the lungs. And so I became interested in how the public is educated on the matters of antibiotic resistance in the environment, and then other health information, and then more specifically on how patients uptake this health information, and then the value in understanding and then in self-advocacy. So I started lending my voice as a patient perspective in research. My background certainly helped in understanding protocol processes, the science of new therapies in cystic fibrosis, and then I had opportunities to serve on various committees with the CF Foundation, and then also have now expanded into working with pharma and industry on protocol reviews, writing lay clinical summaries. And I speak publicly about my health journey to empower other patients to get their voices involved and to bring awareness to obstacles and problems that we're experiencing in our healthcare. As both Carrie and Erin mentioned. And I want my voice to be heard by those who need to hear it, pharmaceutical industry, legislators, patient organizations. I think bringing awareness to our conditions elicits changes in healthcare. And after I shared a personal experience that I had with getting an experimental therapy to treat the antibiotic-resistant bacteria in my lungs, as no antibiotics were working for me at the time. And so I as a patient advocate, I connected directly with researchers, and I received this therapy. And then I wanted to share about it, and I took to social media and I wrote about my experience and had my story published. And that really made me realize how important self-advocacy is for patients. And also that there is just so much collective power when we as patients come together to talk about things that aren't working in healthcare, or just to share about our health needs and experiences. And this puts a face to healthcare, to diseases, and it helps to move the healthcare industry, and then in turn improving our health outcomes for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned really starting to become an advocate when you were working on antibiotic-resistant bacteria and learning more about that. And so I was wondering too, and just in terms of what makes an advocate, Erin and Carrie, was there a moment for you guys where you also felt like you needed to take a stand and, start your advocacy path as opposed to just being a patient or a caregiver? Like, what was the moment that led you to go down that same path?
Carrie, do you
Sure. So yes, it's funny. There was a moment. And it's funny because I was not thinking it at all. But as I was getting sicker and my body was kind of just giving me more and more trouble, and I was working in a very, very physical job at the time. So this was back in 2013. And I knew that my body could not keep up with the job that I had. And I knew that I was not going to be able to stay there. And so I was looking for other places to go, other things I could do. At that time, I was still kind of rotating in some kind of arthritis is wrong with me, but I don't really know what. And I had applied for a position in advocacy at the Arthritis Foundation. I figured, working in advocacy is, still doing important work, but it's not as physical as, running an overnight, 12-hour fundraiser event. And so I applied for this position there. And then I had gotten an invitation to an advocacy workshop that was hosted by Arthritis Foundation, and it was being held, maybe 15 minutes from where I lived and worked. And so my thought was, I'm going to go to this advocacy workshop, not because, I have arthritis and I need to learn how to be an advocate, but because all the people who work in the advocacy department are going to be there. So when they eventually call me for an interview, I will be able to have all these great, things to refer back to. And that was completely where my mind was. This was preparation for a job interview. And it was, I went to this event in October 2013, and this was the first thing that I had ever been to that was for me as a patient. It was the first thing where it was me on the patient side of things. And, I'll be honest, it really scared me at first, because I was meeting people and hearing, talking, seeing people who had, say, for instance, the way the hands had been, had gone through so much difficulty, and, and you could see the deformities that had formed in their hands, and people talking about, how many surgeries they've had. And, in my head, it was just ultimate panic. This is my inevitable future. And, I was just really, really worried about that. And that was kind of where my head was going. And then they had two patient advocate speakers, and I will never forget them, Mary Wu and Mark Hobner. They changed my world, because they both spoke about their experience, which included the long list of joints that had been replaced, the long list of hospitalizations and surgeries, and all of these different things that, again, I'm terrified. This is all that I have to look forward to. But then the more they told their story, they also talked about all these great things that they did, and they had gone and met with these legislators and gotten this change, and they had gone and they met with these other people and they shared their story here, and this is what came of it. And they did not sound like, oh, poor me at all. They did not sound like they had a sob story to tell. These two people were they just seemed so strong and so powerful and so just amazing. And in my head, everything else that, the job, the fears, that everything else went. And I just decided, I want to be them. I want to be that awesome. I want to do that kind of thing. And there was such incredible strength in what they were doing. And I wanted that. And so I immediately, jumped into everything to get as involved as I possibly could with advocacy for arthritis. And then things have grown since there.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. That is very powerful. And I think, as Ella mentioned, that having that collective of voices and that being able to inspire each other is huge. And it sounded like it had a big impact on you as well. And then Erin, was there a moment for you in particular, or?
Yeah, I think a couple years ago, I had planned to take my daughter to Washington, D.C. for Rare Disease Week and Rare Disease Day. And, I was really excited about it. She was excited. It was actually the first time we were doing a trip together out of state that wasn't to go to a children's hospital. So just the two of us, and it was great. And then I came to learn that the rare disease organization that was organizing some of the Capitol Hill events required that you come, a day early and spend like 7 hours in a seminar learning how to talk to your congressman and stuff. And I was like, wow, I don't have that luxury. Like, I don't have an extra day off work. I can't pull my child out of school another day. And I said, well, can you help me get an appointment with the congressman if I can't do that? And they said, no, too bad. And so I've already bought the flights. My daughter's excited, and I was just determined to I'm going to make this happen on my own for her. So, I went through the chief of staff and emailed, and I was persistent, and, I was a reporter for years before. So I know, the world is the land of no. People say no, you keep going. And so eventually got an appointment with him and with our congressman, Ted Deutsch, and just had such an amazing experience, sat down with him. He spent almost an hour with us, understanding the situation, understanding the specific asking points that we had legislatively. And then my daughter, it was great. And then we even, got a follow-up from him afterwards asking about more details on the legislative things that we had asked for. So it was wonderful, but I also learned that, you know, being an advocate is also a little bit of a luxury. Like you have to have the time and the money and the freedom to be able to just go somewhere and do this and not get paid for it. And, you know, most people don't. And so I learned a lot in a couple different ways, and that made me more passionate about advocacy.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good point in that it can be a luxury, and not everyone necessarily would have the background to know how to get started. And so I think some of the questions that are coming in from the audience right now relate to that a lot. So I'd like to ask all of you guys these, and they are, one is just what are some of the best ways for patients to make their voices heard? And what are some of the things patients should know or think about in trying to find those avenues of communication? And so Ella, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I would say, you know, begin with, you know, viewing how other patients and are telling their stories and what platforms they're using and how they're connecting online, you know, to share their voices and you know, the stories that you're remembering, as you know, Carrie said too about that experience where she heard those advocates speaking. You know, those are the stories that capture your attention, and think about that when sharing your experiences, and find a niche where you want to focus your advocacy efforts. I think that's also important, you know, whether that's advocating for rare disease or, you know, policy reform or, you know, patient-centered research. So, you know, find the area that you are most passionate about, and don't be afraid to network. Reach out to people on LinkedIn who may be part of, you know, advocacy organizations or, you know, have roles with pharmaceutical and patient engagement teams, and ask if there's opportunities for involvement or just to share your story and experience. And you just can't, you know, can't be afraid. You kind of have to go out on a limb. And yeah, if it's a no, then you try the next one. A great place to share your story is on Patients Rising stories, that they have a focus on awareness and policy issues, and they have a reputation and visibility. So, you know, a lot of other patients and organizations are viewing these stories to learn more about the experiences of all kinds of patients across the U.S. Another idea is to attend, you know, conferences or meetings such as these, and learn about what's happening in the industry, so that over time, you know, you can become more confident in your knowledge base, and, you know, it just keeps expanding from there. So the more connections you have, the more confidence you have and practice in speaking about your care, and then on, you know, the behalf of others in similar health situations such as yours. And then that's how you can continue to grow your advocacy experience and then your work in the field as well.
That's thank you for sharing that. I think that's really helpful advice, especially because another question did come in about how can we help patients take the first step and overcome the I'm feeling alone. And so I think your advice about, you know, not being afraid to take no, not being afraid to reach out is really applicable there. And then Carrie and Erin, I don't know if you have anything to add to what Ella said about reaching out and sharing your story and starting communications.
I think on the last question about, you know, not feeling alone, I think finding an online support group, whether it's, you know, Inspire or Facebook or Patients Rising or any of, you know, whatever the avenue is, just find your people and connect. And it's amazing how much you can learn and share from other people who are going through the same thing and taking the same treatments and, you know, having the same challenges. And then also I would say consider joining Savvy Co-op, because that's a way to start learning how you can, you know, actually get paid for sharing your insights and sharing your experiences. And also you see a lot of other opportunities by being part of that. And I think Twitter is amazing for patients. If you get on there and you start following advocates and learning from them and seeing what they're doing and connecting and, you know, volunteer for stuff. But it's a really, I think, a good platform for that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, understanding which platforms, and I think hearing from you guys about specifically patient-directed platforms is incredibly useful. And so I know on this call today, we have a mix of patients and advocates and industry. And so one of the things I wanted to touch base on was how can people, who represent industry, maybe it's someone from myself from a more technological company or a pharmaceutical company, how can they be better listeners and better collaborators with patient advocates like yourselves? And then maybe Carrie, we'll start with you.
Sure. It's funny in thinking about that. I hear Hamilton in my head, the song, In the Room Where It Happened. And, that really is the number one thing that all different industries, that's what they need to do, is they need to make sure that they have us in the room where it happens. They need to, as Jen from Savvy would be very, very happy to hear us say it, they need to ask patients. It's, we all come to this with very valuable experiences, but our experiences are very different. And, so having scientists who are very, very well-meaning and think they know what's best for patients, they don't know what it's like to be us. Having doctors who talk about what the best outcomes are that they're looking for, their desired outcomes are not necessarily the same as ours. And even caregivers, whether it's our parents, our children, our spouses, again, very, very valuable experiences. And for a lot of things, they are the ones who need to be in the room where it happens. But their experience and their perspective of what is best for us is still a little bit different than ours. And, just to give an example of this, my husband, I love him to death. He is absolutely, unquestionably the single greatest thing in my life. Always has been, always will be. He's amazing. He supports me in everything. It takes off from work so that he can come with me to advocacy conferences, all of that. But if you were to ask him how to design a bra that's easier for me to put on, there is just no way he would be able to do that, because he's never had to do that. He hasn't worn that. He hasn't, he just hasn't been there. So he wouldn't know where it's difficult to go like this, or if it's easier to twist, or at what point it hurts. He would know as much as I have shared with him, probably more, just that he can pick up. But the details of that are just, no matter how well-meaning he is, they're just not in his experience to be able to talk about or to be able to improve upon. And so that's, they need to ask patients, they need to have us in the room when they're talking about, what new products they can come up with, when they're thinking about how to market it, I can't tell you how many, of us have just cringed and cursed at our TV screens when we see advertisements for medications that will take a completely debilitating disease and they show people playing sports. And we scream from these things because that's just not what life is like for us. And giving that perception only makes things worse for us. And they would know that if they asked us. And so that's really what it comes down to, is they need to ask us what we need, how we need it. What do you think of this example? Every step of the way.
Thank you. I think that's great advice for industry to take away, and then this is common across design, right? You need somebody who has experienced something in the room with you. I think that's a great point, and it's a great Rhett Hamilton song reference. Excellent song. And though, Ella, I know you have experience kind of being both on the science side and the advocacy side. So I'm wondering if you have seen any collaborations that have gone really well, or you can make recommendations yourself.
Yeah. I will definitely agree with what Carrie said. I think as patients, we understand our disease the most and can have very valuable insights to add. And I will just say, I think that the industry should really understand the whole patient experience, not just the disease that they're treating or providing service for, but really everything that makes up the life of a person with that condition. So that's familial support, financial background, really everything that is involved in a person's life. So to understand and to empathize with that, and that's going to build the trust and the relationship between the healthcare industry and patients. And I will say that I think that there is some lack of trust and communication and relationship directly between industry and patients, and I think that's a lot to do with there's a lot of the advocacy organizations that are kind of like the middlemen between patients and then the industry, and they're very helpful in facilitating these communications, but also I think they can sometimes be barriers in having that direct relationship. So I personally have worked with a couple of smaller biotech companies where as a patient, I'm invited to share directly to the team, in a webinar about the personal experience living with cystic fibrosis. And I have also seen some, smaller companies reaching out directly and to patients through social media, inviting them to participate in various ways directly with the pharma teams. And I think that this is another way that those barriers can somewhat be overcome or broken down, really. And I'll comment on a kind of a separate thing quickly, but I know we're running out of time, that there is really, this patient involvement and connection with the pharma industry is definitely growing, but there's still a major lack in the relationship between the research space and the pharma and the patient groups or patients themselves. And when I was at a conference, it was probably before COVID, so maybe 2 years ago. And at the beginning, I had mentioned that I received an experimental therapy called phage therapy. And a researcher was presenting at a poster session some research on phage therapy, this experimental therapy. And I noticed that some of the research that he was working on was the phage that I received for my own care. And so I went up to him and I shared this with him. And then it was like a light bulb went off, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, like I have been working on your data for my proposal, for my research, and how amazing that is." And he had never before interacted with a patient directly. And I almost felt like a celebrity. Like he wanted to take a picture with me. He wanted to like tell everybody about it. And it was just such an amazing moment. Because here, he was able, as a researcher, he was able to put a face to his research, like humanize the I guess humanize the disease experience, or the disease itself, with a person's face, with the life of somebody. And so I think that is just another way, where we can improve the research progress, just the research continuum, by getting patients' faces, patient involvement, and this co-creation, co-collaboration, understanding, from research inception all the way through product development.
Thank you so much. That is an incredible story. And I think a good reminder for us to close on is just that there is always a live person at the other end of whatever project we're working on, and that communication with patients, between industry and amongst each other, and just elevating everyone's stories is so important. And so we are at time, but thank you guys so much for coming and talking today. I think this was wonderful. I mean, I know I learned a lot. I'm sure people in our audience did as well. And so, yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining us for NewYorkBIO's first Patient Engagement Summit. All of the panels from the event can be found online on NewYorkBIO's YouTube channel, and we hope they will be shared and heard. We want to thank our sponsors and our partners for coming together to help build an exceptional event. and we hope to see you next year at what will be our second annual Patient Engagement Summit. Until then,